Hello everyone, and welcome this afternoon to our webinar, which today will focus on design thinking. And it's something that's becoming increasingly prominent and prevalent. And I'm absolutely delighted today that I have Lynn Whelan, who works as a design strategist with industry, and she's affiliated to Carlo IT, and she's coming to this at a very, very high level. She's done a huge amount of it, and she's presently working on her PhD in the area. So Lynn is going to present to us probably for about 35-40 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A, and Lorraine Egan from our mentor panel, and a lot of you would know Lorraine. Lorraine had her own knitwear business, had an esteemed career in Enterprise Ireland in their design unit there. So we're in great company today, and Lynn and Lorraine and myself will answer questions once Lynn has given her presentation. So I'm not going to delay any further, and with that, Lynn, would you like to kick off? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Emer. Thanks for the intro. I'm delighted to be here today. So I'm just going to share my screen here just to get a presentation up. Okay, you all see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'm here today to talk about design, the design approach, how we apply it to business as opposed to just specifically for products, but how we apply it to the business model and how we apply it for growth and innovation. So today it'll be sort of an overview of the theory behind that, the process behind that, just how it works and what it looks like. And then just a couple of case studies that might just demonstrate in a little bit more detail some examples. So I hope you all had your Weetabix this morning. As Emer said, Lynn Whelan is my name. I'm a senior design strategist. I'm employed by the Institute of Technology in Carlo, and I work in the Design Plus Technology Gateway. And the Gateway is one of 15 gateways across the country that all sit in institutes of technologies, and they all have their own specialism. And ours is design and the design approach. So I work there every day dealing with industry and primarily SMEs, but also multinationals, but everything from startups across the board. From my own background, I have a BA in product design innovation. I have a master's in design-driven innovation. And as Emer mentioned, I'm doing a part-time PhD at the moment in strategic design and stimulating strategic design in Irish SMEs. So what does it look like, I suppose, is the first thing, this work that we're doing. Like I said, I'm working with SMEs every day, and we're looking at these, using a design approach for growth, innovation, and development. So first of all, to say it's a very visual process that we engage in. As you can see by the walls there, this is our studio. And before COVID, we would have had everyone in the studio. So we would have had owner managers, staff, whatever participants are coming to engage with us in the process would come into the studio, and we'd be visualizing the work on the white walls and in various ways. And we're using visual toolkits as well. You may have heard of designers' toolkits. We've developed and refined an extensive toolkit of about 40 tools that come from both the business sector, the design sector, and the innovation sector combined. So it's an innovation toolkit. And the tools, I suppose, to describe them, they differ from templates in that they are not predefined. If you have templates, you're sort of, there's 4 boxes, you fill in 4 boxes. Whereas with the tools, they're designed really to challenge the thinking and to prompt us and look at it critically, I suppose. So we have lots of tools to support the process as well. Since COVID, obviously, we've had to shift ourselves. We couldn't have everyone in the studio. So we've moved now to working on Microsoft Teams. So similar to this, we'd have a video connection with the companies, and we would work on a digital whiteboard. So it allows us to do all the same visualization techniques and capture all the data in the way we want. So we use Miro digital whiteboards to do that at the moment. And the way we engage, I suppose, with companies is we have, a lot of it will be through the likes of innovation vouchers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those. They're worth €5,000. They're supported by Enterprise Ireland and local enterprise offices. And it allows companies to come and work with us in the Institute, work in the Design Plus studio over a series of workshops as a project. And we're working with them on a one-to-one, and it allows us to sort of dig in and actually support and facilitate the innovation process with a company. And that could happen over a period of weeks or months. We also then deliver programs. So I've been developing programs for the last few years. And what the programs are is where we would bring maybe 10 companies or even up to 20 companies together. And we would bring them through the program together. And some of it is done through what we call master classes, where everyone's together. And we get the value there of peer exchange. So we can use the facilitation process, but we can deal with, extract each other's expertise as well throughout that process. So the master classes can be very valuable for that. We do that sometimes when we're all in the same sector. So for example, it could be the food and drink sector might come together. We'd have the 10 or 20 companies and we'd be delivering the program. Or it might be mixed sectors. So we would have a group of 10 companies from all across the board, from the financial sector to the insurance sector to food and drink, engineering, retail, right across the board, and craft. In between the masterclasses in those programs, we still do separate one-to-one sessions because there's still parts that are more appropriate and suitable for working with people individually through the process. Then we also have academic and educational offerings. We've just recently developed a level 9 accredited course in design-driven innovation. So one of the early ones in the country. But again, if anyone wants to talk to me about any of those things, I'm happy to discuss it in more detail on a one-to-one or at the Q&A. We can go into a little bit more details about how that works. Again, as I said, the sectors that we work with are right across the board. So, you know, we would have obviously always worked with the traditional sort of product design sector, looking at new products and product development. But when we're applying design strategy, we're looking at a much broader aspect of the business itself. And it's applicable to all of these other sectors that I've mentioned, which has really sort of opened the doors as to how design can be applied in all of those companies. With that in mind, then, I suppose the question to ask is, well, what is design strategy? You know, what does it look like? What is it? People may have heard of design thinking quite a lot. And you know, the word, that description is used quite a lot, design thinking, and it was sought after. Design strategy is a form of design thinking, but it has a specific application. So I suppose the first thing to say is there is a theory behind it. So the theory being steeped in that design thinking. The problem with that is that it's theoretical and people struggle to access that and to apply it to their own business. You know, it still seems very distant. People talk about designerly ways of thinking and, you know, mindsets and stuff, and that's really hard to access. And actually innovation in itself is a process of unknown outcomes. So if we know what the outcome is going to be, we're not innovating. So now we're dealing with a real challenge. We've got something with unknown outcomes and something with a way of thinking and a mindset. So that's very difficult for companies to access. However, what we have done in the Design Plus Technology Gateway is we have taken the sort of theoretical approach. This is some of the theoretical approaches you may have come across in the past when people talk about design thinking, from Stanford D School, IDEO, the British Design Council. This double diamond is another term you might have heard of. And what that's representing is a way of thinking. So it's starting off and thinking really broadly and really widely about things, and then narrowing down and framing and decision making. So it's this sort of what they call divergent and convergent thinking. So again, this is all quite theoretical. What we've done is we've taken that thinking and that approach, and we've turned it into a more actionable and applicable process for businesses to access and to be able to replicate it themselves, and to be facilitated through this process. So again, I'll just explain briefly what this looks like then when we've actually translated it into the business landscape. So we still begin, it's sort of a 4-stage process. That looks quite simple, 4 stages. However, it's not exactly always linear, and the focus can often be heavier on one particular area than another, depending on the company's needs and what challenges are presented. And we have a variety of outcomes that I can go through in a moment. But if we just look at the first circle there, so we're talking about design strategy for innovation. What's the first thing we do when we're facilitating a company through this is we look at what we call state of play. So this is going broad. But what we're actually doing here is we're mapping the entire business ecosystem. If we were looking at specifically a product design, you'll hear people often refer to user-centered. It's a user-centered approach, and you always start with the users, which is the appropriate thing when you're developing a product. But when we're looking at unknown outcomes in an innovation process and we're applying design strategy, we don't actually know who those end users might be yet. We haven't got that far yet. So we're actually taking almost a step back into a broader ecosystem. We're looking at, yes, the existing users that we have now and their needs, but we're also looking at a huge amount of other things around the business. We're looking at the human drivers primarily of the owner manager as well, if it's an SME, because that's one of the most important and fundamental aspects to what will drive innovation or drive growth in the company. Who is the person? What is their vision? What is their aspiration? What parts do they enjoy the most? Where are their strengths? What bits do they hate and just not want to do? And, you know, looking at everything, putting it out, playing devil's advocate with it, challenging it, mapping it, having a look at it. You know, it's very different if it's, for example, is the business a legacy business? Or is it a business to be built up and sold? Is it to make a living? You know, they're all three very different outlooks, and they need very different approaches. You know, so if it's just to make a living, it might be about, you know, making it sustainable and secure and adaptable to change. Or if it's developing it to grow to sell, well, there has to be an identified target market who may be interested in buying that. And what value do they need to see within that company as it's developing? So there's very different ways to look at it. But what we also do when we're mapping that, this is where we're in that studio on the walls or on our digital whiteboards, we're mapping this out. We also look at things like the roles and how the roles have developed in the company. And as I said, where the strengths and weaknesses are there and where the opportunities are. We look at resources, we look at workflow processes, but almost not like a production necessarily like Lean might. We're looking at it as in not just how you do things, but how you engage with people and how they engage with you. And that can be very different. We can spend a huge amount of time sometimes with workflow processes and what's happening within the company and the general activities and the stakeholders around the company and what their motivations are. So if any change is going to happen in any way, it's going to impact lots of things. So we need to make sure we've kind of considered all the things and we look at all the things and we look at everything laid out and mapped. And they're really interesting discussions to have with companies. You know, people often feel there's a great burden lifted at that stage to actually see it. It's quite enlightening to see your business when you actually spend the time and sort of hold a mirror up to it in that way. And we get to visually map it and we get to see connections with things. And so by the end, we get to see a very sort of new look at the value proposition and the overall model that we have. And now the opportunities start to become apparent, as do the challenge areas. And this is the space, you know, we're playing devil's advocate, we're challenging this is what the process is and what the tool is all about, challenging the thinking. You know, we're trying to walk a mile in your shoes to facilitate and really get in there as well. But now we get to frame those. We get to sort of look at, okay, where are the opportunities here for this person, this company, and where are the challenges? You know, where are the things and the barriers that might be holding back the pathway to a vision of what the business is or a vision of what the role is even within it, and whether there's, you know, opportunities for things that hadn't been identified before. And it's really important at that stage to frame those really specifically and really precisely, because oftentimes we hear the challenges might be listed out, and the challenges, there could be, you know, 5 or 6 different challenges. But when we actually dig in and we try to define what's the cause of those challenges, we find actually it's a singular cause, or maybe it's only 2 causes, you know, that's causing a lot of different issues. So we're really starting to dig into the specifics and start looking at what those opportunities are for the company and what those challenges are. When we have that set, when we've got to that point where we can actually, you know, identify those, we can then move on to going, okay, stage 3, ideation and evaluation. What that means is we can now generate new ideas we have some really good definitive statements there to build on as to what the opportunities are and the challenges. So we can begin to generate new ideas. And again, this is where the designer's toolkit comes into play. Some companies are really good at coming up with lots of ideas, others not so much. They would struggle, they might come to us with no ideas at all to start with, that's fine. Because the tools are actually designed to do that, to help prompt and stimulate the generation of new ideas. And so they're quite important at that point. Equally, and one of the huge things that companies miss is when they have all these ideas, how do we know when we have a good one? How do we know if it's the right time for it? How do we know if we have 2 or 3 ideas, which ones to do first and which ones come later? And that can be really difficult, and it can cause almost a form of inertia or lack of doing anything, because you're just not sure, you don't have anything really driving one particular area. So again, we have some very specific evaluation tools. They're so important, and they combine a series of different evaluation processes and techniques, including usability, feasibility, viability. And that's 3 words that you may have associated with design thinking previously. It's the core of kind of design thinking: usability, feasibility, viability. So with usability, you're looking at if you have an idea to do something, either within the company, a collaboration, a new way of doing something, or a new product or a new market. If we put those ideas down and we're looking at usability, we're looking at all those human factors around it and who's impacted and how it's responding to user needs, to the end users that may be the appropriate market for this, but also to all the stakeholders and all the people that are engaged from a company level as well. And does it fit with that overall vision as well? So we're looking at all the usability factors. Feasibility, again, we're looking, is this technically feasible? Does the company have the capacity or the capability to deliver this? And if not, with some expertise and supports, is it feasible to actually do whatever the innovation or idea is? And viability. So even if the user things seem to be okay and technically this seems feasible, but is it viable? Is it going to make enough money to make it worthwhile doing this particular thing? And that's really important as well. So they're all mapped out and explored, again, in a very verbal and a very visual way that we can dig into. So rather than sort of traditional, I suppose, business mentoring tends to rely a lot on text and reports and projections. At this stage, we're only creating the strategies for the innovation. We can't predict, and I think people really struggle with some of those early business plans when they're not quite ready. So it's this strategy piece, I think, that's often helps there. So we're looking at it in that broad sense about what fits and what's right. And when we've got to that, the evaluation is really about making decisions then, because once the evaluation is happening, we're making decisions, supporting the decision making, and that leads us into the 4th stage, which is actually road mapping. So now we can begin to action. We can begin to take action. Decisions have been made, and those decisions now have a rigor. They have, much better chance of viability going forward. They've been evaluated. They come from somewhere. The rationale is there because of the previous mapping of the business ecosystem and the detail that's been gone into all the way through the process. So you have a much stronger chance of development. You also have now a roadmap and a process that shows the rationale in a very visual way that you can communicate with other stakeholders. So you can communicate with other people in your company what the idea is and why it's a good idea. Or you can communicate with funding agencies, so local enterprise or elsewhere, or other stakeholders that might invest, other investors. So we create a strategic roadmap with you. And the roadmap is basically steps to implementation. So again, it's all on one sheet. It's a visual infographic roadmap. Steps to implementation. How are we going to implement this? What resources are needed is marked at each stage on the map, whether that's other skill sets or financial supports, etc. What's needed. We look at what we call participation scope. Who do you need to be involved? Maybe it's only one person, but maybe it's a few different people involved, and what their roles are and what that looks like. If there's any external supports that need to come in, when are they coming in? How are they funded and what does it look like? And we look at timescales, you know, to set some kind of metric around timescales as to the implementation itself and how we're going to measure that along the way. So, you know, the company ends up with one very significant roadmap with everything on the one page. So we call that, you know, as an outcome, a structured innovation strategy. What we also do then from our position is make sure that we connect that to a funding stream or a resource or whatever is needed for the development. So it might be a new collaboration that we've identified with somebody else to do something. It might be a feasibility study to do something or to check something out, in which case there's funding, you know, through local enterprises, etc. So we'd be familiar with these areas as well, and we can help support that next stage of development and making sure everybody's connected to the next stage as well. I always describe it as, because people say, again, it's unknown outcomes. So how do you know it's going to happen? What am I going to get out the end? You know, and it was always too vague to just, you know, not be able to describe that. But when we actually break it down, it can be broken into those 3 blue circles. So there's outputs, outcomes, and impacts. So the outputs, like I said, is the physical material things you get out of the engagement. So it's actually the toolkit, should be up there as well. It's the toolkit, it's the strategic roadmap, and some infographics maybe of processes or stuff that you needed to develop. The outcomes then are the actual innovation strategy, what you're going to do, what's happened in that series of workshops, and those connections and collaborations that are needed. The impacts, though, we hope are kind of longer term, and that's, you know, you've now got these tools and you've been facilitated in using them. You know, you're critically assessing the business, you're doing a critical review of the business, you're starting to think of it from sort of the other side of the counter, you're looking in at it, and you get to also look at opportunities in that way. So you become much quicker at identifying opportunities as well as barriers when you're critically assessing the business. Strategic planning, you've engaged in strategic planning, and one of the first things that we put into the roadmap as part of what's going to happen from here on in is that you're going to carve out some time within your current structure to actually keep this process going yourself, to actually use the tools. And we show you, depending on your company, which tools might be appropriate. We work with you to figure that out and make a plan together as to what will work for you going forward. As I said, there's over 40 tools in the toolkit, but maybe a company might find 5 or 6 that are really, you know, impactful for them and work really well for them, that they were going to continue using by themselves or with the team. Also, you've been introduced hopefully to the visualization techniques. It's a really powerful thing when you can actually just visualize your thoughts and these processes and what's actually happening. And again, the tools allow you to do that. They're backdrops for that. Also, hopefully it provides a shared context. That roadmap is a really good tool for you to continue those discussions and share the thinking with anybody else. It's all there. And ultimately, this can lead to some significant business transformations as you go forward, is what we would hope. So that's the process at rocket speed, but that's the kind of process. The little blue kind of words that are underneath each stage represent the various tools that we use. The tools are completely interchangeable and we use them at multiple times back and forward all over the place. But I've tried to categorize them where we most frequently use them under each stage, just for reference. Okay. So now just to kind of show a little example, that's kind of the theoretical stuff, that's the process itself and how we apply it. So now to look at just a few case studies. And I have 2 here from craft, because obviously we have craft sector here today, but I also thought I'd include 2 from food and drink sector, which we work with as well, because the food and drink sector and the craft sector, in our experience, face similar challenges in dealing with things like scalability, particularly, but also export and specialty markets and things like that. So I mixed it up a little bit and included 2 of our food and drink companies as well. So just to give a little background on those. So the first one there, MCGUIRE Diamonds. Eric McGuire approached us and we went through, I think he started with an innovation voucher and he came and he did a series of workshops with us. It was back in the studio at that stage. Eric has a retail outlet, jewellery retail outlet in Gorey, in Wexford, and he was a diamond specialist. So he was dealing very much with the engagement in the wedding market and that sort of thing. But this was causing him problems in relation to scaling because people needed to actually come in the door. It wasn't a product necessarily to sell online. People wanted to come in if they were buying, obviously, an engagement ring or diamonds. You want to see them. So, you know, whilst he had a good, strong market, he's 20 years in business, so he had a very strong business going on there, and he had other jewelry he was selling. But when we went through this process with him, he had a personal ambition and a skill set for fine jewelry making that he wanted to kind of lean on a little bit more. The problem was we did some process mapping with him that I referred to there earlier, where we mapped out, well, what happens when you go to make this piece of jewelry? What do you do? What is the actual process for making it? And there's a couple of bits along the way where he has to outsource some of the jobs along the way, for the molds and for something else. So he had a couple of little pieces where he was outsourcing, and that was causing him huge headaches, lack of control, delays in time. It was inflexible for having to iterate or change anything. And it just was putting him off delving or investing into that area. So we looked at all the options around that with him, and we looked at technologies, and we actually went through we did a little kind of a pilot study with him with some of our 3D printers to look at printing the molds with 3D printers and what that would look like. And actually the technology was really successful, and it meant he could get a little desktop 3D printer, nothing too dramatic. There was a few pieces of equipment that he identified that would actually really help him to deliver the whole process himself. So we worked with him to do that and piloted and tested it and got him up and running. And Eric got his first collection of jewelry out. It now allows him to export, to sell online, to sell to other retailers, and develop his own collections depending on different target markets for, you know, the contemporary markets, younger markets, older markets, price points, etc. He can create collections and ranges. So this was his first collection, 30 pieces of gold, which is now online. And I would suggest anyone go and check it out. They're fabulous pieces. So if you're ever looking for anything, do support him. He was great. So we still touch base with Eric. There's a few other projects that have come up along the way that we sort of tapped in and out to with them, and that's what we hope to do with most companies. We're there to support longer term. We're invested in the company at that stage ourselves, and we like to continue that support. And it can be a lonely road, as we know, for SME owner managers on their own, and so we're there for that. So that was Eric. So another one then we worked with, this one obviously from the food and drink sector, was Gaelic Escargot, so an Irish snail producer, Eva. Eva was one of the most dynamic and innovative SME owners I'd come across in a long time. She's absolutely fabulous and hugely energetic about the business. She was producing snails for an export market for restaurants and hotels and eateries across Europe. It's not a huge Irish market just yet, but that's where the climate was good for her, and the farming elements of it work really well for her here. So she was able to grow the snails here and export them. Needless to say, she was hit really hard by COVID. The restaurants all closed, and lots of things were hit that stopped her business. But people had often come to her looking for training in snail farming. How do you do it? It's a very new thing still in Ireland, you know, and lots of people had requested from her how to do it. And she was spending a lot of her time doing that, supporting and helping and giving advice wherever she could. But to formalize that into some online training became something that she now had time to focus on and actually do. And also to look at a really unique model of having kind of host farmers. So if you're running the training programs and you're training people as to how to do this, you also can supply them with a market. So they're producing for Gaelic Escargot then in effect. So it was being developed throughout that. And the problem with the online training was she was, you know, looking at how do we do this online training without the experience. She loved having people on site and loved letting them see the snails and actually feel the snails, because until they did that, they really didn't know if it was something they were going to like or not. So we looked at some experiential kits, so sort of almost like a starter kit for a would-be snail farmer to work with, you know. So we've had a really exciting time with Eva. We're still obviously, wherever we can, we'll continue to support Eva in all. She's tons of other ideas that we'll be working with her on, but it was a very exciting project and company to work on. Another one then was Mackmore Buffalo. So it's another Wexford man, and this is Liam Byrne. And Liam has a buffalo farm, and he approached us as well. He was looking at his own strategy and the business model and where to grow. So this was another growth area. And a bit like I hear from the craft sector quite a lot is the whole principle of what the craft is the opposite of what we would see as mass produced. And therefore there's an immediate conflict as to how to scale. And this was the same case for Liam. Liam loved his buffaloes. I mean, I went down to visit the farm, and he has a little dog who runs it every morning, runs up and down the road, giving kisses to the buffalo. It's hilarious. And he's very passionate about it. It's a family farm. And his family are involved, and his house is right there in the heart of it. And so it's a personable thing for him as well. Aldi had approached him. It's a unique product. This is where this is going to go. This is, Aldi knock on the door. And again, that means immediate large scale production. Now, if you were to just put down on paper and look at, a revenue model, a more traditional business model approach, you would be looking at the figures and going, yeah, this is the way forward. He was looking at the figures going, okay, I need to increase the herd so I can ensure supply. In order to increase the herd, I need to increase the barns and housing and other facilities on site, and so on and so forth. And suddenly this thing was turning into something that wasn't what Liam had in his mind or in his vision. And to dig into that a little bit more. And one of the things we did find out with Liam, or discover with Liam, was that he had a great passion for the recipes and the cooking. He loved that. So he was making at the time beef. It's beef, buffalo, steaks, burgers, sausages. They were his main products. So we began to look at other alternatives to that. That meant he could we have a saying that we use all the time is start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. So utilizing all your own resources to start with before you go anywhere else. He had a herd. What could he possibly do with the herd that would increase his value without having to increase the herd necessarily? So we looked at some dried products like rissolas and other sort of air dried products and recipes that he could work on that had a much higher value per kilo, and also could potentially become the Aldi product, but in a very different way that allowed him to do what he loved, allowed him to keep the model to a way that worked for him. And so again, this was a really interesting project to work on, and obviously very unique kind of farming and new product introduction as well. So yeah, it resulted in not only new product, but a new way of doing things as well in and around the business, and him identifying what was core value to where he was going with this as a family business. So the next one was Mohu Designs. Alison, some of you may have met Alison before. Alison has an amazing product. So she was making these amazing tools for people with sensory needs and sensory processing difficulties. So weighted blankets and tactile products and tactile blankets and things, and beautifully crafted, beautifully made, beautiful materials. But she was selling it through a supply chain that involved, she was selling it, through a supply chain that went to care homes primarily, and places like that. So it was clients that maybe had end users that had sort of difficulties, things like maybe dementia or other processing difficulties. And she was selling it through this distribution chain and supply chain that meant she had multiple distributors along the way, multiple barriers along the way. Very rarely did she ever get to connect with a family or end users to really sort of talk about the quality and the intent behind the product and what had gone into it. And this was really impeding growth for Alison as well. So we looked at other markets. We looked at just blowing this open into a retail scenario. We all know like autism and all of these other conditions are becoming way more mainstream, way more talked about, and products are becoming more mainstream in those fields as well. So to look at where some of these products could be adapted and developed and sold mainstream. And Alison actually developed some CamKit, a happy kit and a busy kit for a more targeted end user approach. Now, again, COVID has had obviously massive impacts there, and that one of the key things was going to be getting this into some retail chains, which we had to put on hold. But in the meantime, she was able to develop it from a web perspective to sell directly to her end users and target markets. So that was another really interesting one, and we still work with Alison as well. So that's it really. That's like a quick kind of run through the theory and the practice of what we actually do when we talk about applying design for developing strategies for growth and innovation, and using those principles of design thinking into that process, but making it something that businesses can access, that they can see, that they can take away the toolkits and actually use again and again, and that they can continue to work with us going forward. So we've often said it, and we talked to Emer about it now as well. We would love to do something with the craft sector ourselves in relation to a program or something like that down the line, where we can get a group in and actually bring them through a process. And I've said there's funding there we can try and track down to support that. So if anyone's interested, obviously, you know, contact us and be in touch, that we can get into that discussion and at least see where it leads to. But otherwise, thank you very much. And absolutely, if there's any questions or anything, Emer, I'm more than happy to shout. Okay.
Lynn, thank you so much. That was absolutely inspiring. And as Mary has said here, fascinating insights into design strategy. And she's interested in the tools to determine how to know if you have a good idea. Could you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Mary. Thanks for that. Yeah, they're one of the most important things, Mary, when we're looking at, you know, they're part of our evaluation tools, is what we call them, Mary. And we've several in the toolkit that we would use. So we have things like, well, we start at the beginning with things like, okay, we have a tool that's really simple, kind of a left and right sided piece. This is the very beginning one that we would say, okay, what's driving us to do that? And what's the barrier? What's stopping us to do that? That's one of the things. We would also look at like a criteria matrix tool that we have. So you actually put down the values that you're looking for along the top. So it might be things that are in line with your ethical stance, for example, with your company. Things that fit a particular bracket of market of end user, you know, whether it's an older bracket or younger market, who, you know, that it fits that model of your key target market you're after. Various criteria that are important to you. And then we put the ideas down and we actually start scoring along the way. Where are they fitting? Which ones are actually more in line with all of those things that are important to you? And just look at them as an overview. Then we also bring them all from there through, like I said, very specific tools around this usability, feasibility, and viability. And again, we can get a really good insight from that. So we would put the ideas down. We'd start with idea number one. And we would look and say, okay, usability, and we would map all those usability factors. We have lots of prompts to ask us about that. So users, as in, you're the first user, you're there as well as these end users, your user, other staff or, you know, partners in the business are all users. These are all the human drivers is what we mean when we say usability at this instance. And we're looking at the impacts that anything you're thinking about doing might have on any of those people. But also we're looking at then the actual usability, if it's a product or if it's a new way of doing things, how could that actually work? And we go into all the detail and map it out. We actually, you know, we do it like it's happening. You know, we work with you on it and we map it out. What would it actually look like? How would it work? How would it happen? And so there's a lot of work goes around that one piece of usability. But then there's also feasibility. Okay, we know the problems with the user piece, but we know all the pluses as well, and we know how to address them now. We've done that. Feasibility, is it technically feasible? So can you technically do it, or can you get in the resources to, you know, to come in, maybe if it's a digitization thing, or if it's a one-off development of something, a manufacturing thing or a mold or something that needs to be done, or to get you into some particular market and you need, you know, specialized support, that needs to be identified too. Is this technically feasible? And is it market feasible? Can we do this? And we just assess it in that way. And then, like I said, the last one is the viability. It's really important. So even if we can do it, doesn't always mean we should do it. So, you know, is it viable? Is it going to make you enough money? You know, sometimes people look at some of the things and they go, oh my God, this is a brilliant thing. This is, you know, this pen, and I can sell this and people would love it. Yes, they will, but if they're only spending 10 pence on it, have you a business model, you know? So we literally have to like break it down and really look at it and what's important. Again, to the main driver of this, the owner manager, you know, what's going to work? Do you want something that's going to be high volume but low value, or are we going after something that's high value but low volume? You know, if you're small SME, where's your position there? So we're looking at all those things around viability. So that's all in the kind of toolkit. That's all part of the evaluation and helping the decision-making piece. I hope that kind of answers.
Yeah, it does. Is there any kind of quick fix book? Starter quick fix book?
Well, actually, to be honest, we're in the process of putting our own book together for this year, because you know, as you can see, the toolkit has been quite well refined over years of working with industry, and we've made a lot of the tools ourselves from scratch as well. And it is unique as it comes from, like I said, there's some business tools in there, like for example, the Anshoff matrix, which is a business tool, you know, Eisenhower tool as well. But we also have then all the really traditional design tools like user journey mapping and personas and stuff that we would use in design quite a lot. And then there's also innovation tools, so for generating these new ideas and stuff like that. So it's quite a unique mix. So we're actually trying to put it into our own book as we speak. Emma, we're putting that together. But in saying that, when we do the programs, we actually issue all the participants with the full toolkit.
Yeah, and it is something that our craft and design clients, you know, I mean, I'm not pushing on them, but could be interested in that.
Yes.
You know, they may have studied design in NCAD or one of the other colleges. Yeah. And you know, it could be a progression to study. Were you saying it's a level 9?
Yeah, sorry. There is a course that we have developed, a level 9 sort of module in design-driven innovation. We're actually working on a couple of others at the moment in relation to the more business side as opposed to product. We're taking it sort of slightly away from the engineering track. We'll have that as a separate track, but to look at more specifically applying it around the businesses, you know. And that's why I think, like I said, craft, I think, are similar to food and drink as well. You know, there's a certain element there of creativity and not necessarily driven just by the revenue streams and, you know, what comes out of that. That's not how they started, you know. So this process can be really useful because it's so oriented around those human drivers and human motivations that are so important to make something viable. And also it's such a visual process as well. You know, it can be a really good way to just get them doing what they want to do, what they love doing, but actually making some money at it as well, you know, and trying to bring all that together, you know.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's the low volume and high value piece.
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would see as being the key thing. Yeah. I mean, Lorraine, what would you think of bringing this?
You know, I think that was really, really interesting, Lynn. I must say thank you for that. No, but I think just in what you described in the presentation, it's also bringing the sort of whole company together, you know, as part of a team. And it's, you know, very often maybe in larger companies, you know, you have production, you have the different strands of the business, and they're all so busy doing what they do that they, you know, the communication between them, they very often don't have time to even do that. And so from that, doing a project like this or a program like this is fantastic for the communication in the company, to get everybody, you know, thinking and everybody agreeing on what the goals are and agreeing on how we can do whatever the thing is. So yes. I think that is such a valuable part of what you have described.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, and we do see that. It is, like I said, when we've seen it so many times before. People, you know, have great intent, and they want to do something different, or they want to go to a new market, or they you know, they bring it up internally, and they might even get as far as getting investment to somebody to do a market research piece, and it comes back as a report that can be difficult to access. It's difficult to share text reports, you know. People just don't have the time to actually delve in and do all of that, you know. So to have this shared context and to have everybody's own personal roles and visions. Like we do a kind of a role review piece, which is really interesting. It's not about appraisals about what people are actually doing, but it's about where's the opportunities with their roles and how have the roles evolved and have they any other interests that they really like. And, you know, we worked with Atlantic Sea Kayaking, some of you may know, down in West Cork as well. And, you know, they were talking to their staff, and it turned out that all these different hobbies and interests and other things that they liked, and they were able to incorporate it into their work. So they were able to do the kayaking tours, but include bird watching or stargazing at night or music on the cliffs. They had all these amazing stuff that they were using the passions and the skill sets of the team they were working with. So it's you know, it's down to that level of allowing everybody to have ownership and a shared context of where are we all going and for what purpose for each of us, you know? So yeah, definitely.
Mary says she'd be happy to road test your book, but taking this, which is a great compliment, taking this slightly further, it's an area, as you alluded to, Lynn, that the Design Crafts Council is really interested in, and I would envisage that we will be looking seriously at rolling out something that's meaningful and accessible to our clients. There'll be in no way academic, it'll just be really
hands-on,
and useful.
Yeah, the programs we're doing at the minute, we, like as I said, we're kind of working, and we've been sort of figuring this out as well, because we've had huge numbers and small numbers and big numbers, and we're sort of figuring where the best fits are. We do quite a lot of, you know, groups of 10 at a time over about a 4 to 6 week period. Sometimes we would do that sort of a go at it, where we bring them through this process, and we have a mix of one-to-ones and then masterclasses together. And that's a really successful program. And I know the local enterprise offices have supported those, from Offaly, Laois, Carlow, Tipperary. I don't know, there's multiple local enterprises have been really forward in supporting the programs, you know. So there might, I definitely would love to work, which is on developing something for the craft sector would be very appropriate, I think, you know, to bring them together in that way.
Absolutely, it'd be great, and particularly when the local enterprise offices are in partnership with us and so hugely supportive. I mean, I can't praise them enough for their ongoing support of the craft industry when they've so many other sectors to deal with, you know.
And likewise with us, with the programs, Emer, you know, they value the programs and support the programs for the companies, for the clients to actually come along, for the companies to engage. But equally, they're as interested in the end. So what's coming out? So they've supported follow-on feasibility studies, business expansion grants, pilot studies, and things that we can help link the companies into for development. And there's lots of supports for those as well. So, you know, it's really good to be on that loop, if you like, you know, to really bring something to fruition.
Exactly. And Lorraine, you think it's definitely something that can be applied to craft and design effectively?
Oh yes, yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose I feel that, you know, if you're making a product, you're sort of very focused on that. But this gives people the opportunity to look at the bigger picture of how you know, what is the focus of the business, but longer term, or maybe, and the bigger, as I say, the bigger picture of, you know, where are they going? Are they going to develop new products, or just, Lynn, as you had said about that down in West Cork, the company looking at, you know, a whole lot of different options. Even the opportunity to sit down with the group and with the company and to throw those ideas into the pot, even if a lot of them aren't maybe going to be runners, but it's just even to open the idea, open the discussions, and you never know where that might actually go. And you know, when you're working in a company on a day-to-day basis, which, you know, I know from over the years going in and out to companies, and, you know, it is quite refreshing to be able to get off the kind of the day-to-day treadmill and do something like this, because even though it's what a lot of people are, you know, they're expert at doing whatever their particular role is, but to have the opportunity to share ideas with other people who are also working in the same company or the same environment. And then you never know where that might lead on. So it can be hugely kind of exhilarating, really.
Yeah, I think the facilitation is helpful as well. You know, because like I said, Lorraine, with the best of intentions, and we see it all the time, companies try to have meetings to do this sort of, you know, to innovate or to brainstorm is one that often would start as you can see from our process, brainstorming comes in at about step 3. So they're jumping straight in the deep end to start with. But they're used to working with each other in a different way. And those different ranks, if you want to call it that, can get in the way a little bit as well. Whereas if it's facilitated, what we always try and say, it's a safe space, you know, is what we try and create, a safe space. And that all ideas, you know, this thing, there's no such thing as a bad idea. The thing is, we don't know what we need to do is give every idea its opportunity. So everything is captured, and that's why the evaluation is there. We don't need to worry about deciding if it's good or bad. Just get it down. And then we bring them all through a proper evaluation, and it becomes self-apparent. Nobody needs to say, I agree or I don't or agree. It becomes self-apparent, you know, and that's a great value, I think, in those sort of companies, and get you, like I said, out of your normal everyday space, you know? Yeah,
no, absolutely.
Well, today's been a really great taster. And if anybody wants to listen back, they can go back and look at the presentation again. And please do watch out for updates from the Design Crafts Council in this space, because I'd say there'll be something coming very, very soon. So with that, I'd really like to thank Lorraine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah,
really
thank you so much. It really was. It was very, very interesting. And Lynn, our anchor lady for the day, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you both. And our audience, thank you for joining me. So until the next time, thank you very much.
Thanks, Emer. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks
Bye.
very much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.